Welcome everybody to the 2018 Polyphasic survey results and analysis discussion. This is hosted on Discord. My name is Crimson Flower. I'm the current owner of the Polyphasic Discord server. I'm a main author of polyphasic.net and I'm a moderator on the r/polyphasic subreddit. Today, the topic, as I said, is the 2018 Polyphasic survey results and analysis. And if we can, we will go through the whole thing, but I'd also like to have an active discussion since these topics are directly relevant to polyphasic sleepers. So if you have any questions or would like to know something about this study, don't hesitate to ask. I'm the one that has conducted this survey and analyzed the results, so I should be the best guy to ask about this. So we should start with the introduction to the survey. It was launched in August of 2018 with the intent to create a basis for future surveys. What this means is that the questions might not have been so thought out as we would have liked, but the idea was just to gather as much as we can so that we can create a new survey in 2019, a new survey in 2020 maybe even, and have a better set of answers or options to choose from for that one. Results were gathered up until December of 2018, and we got 78 entries, of which 2 were discarded. Successfully adapted people were prioritized over unsuccessful people, but both entries were still gathered. 2 people who answered this survey had no experience with polyphasic sleeping, and 42 people had adapted to at least one schedule. Here we can see some percentages. 42 people had adapted to at least one schedule. The average adapted schedules per person who had adapted to something was 1.83. What this means is that the average person who had adapted something had adapted to 1.83 schedules. We had an overall 64% of adapted per attempted schedules. And per person, when you consider or attempted schedules per person were 1.91, and adapted per attempted schedules in total, so not just the 42 ones but counting everyone, was 38%. I've written here that correlations may not necessarily be causational in this study or in this survey. What this means is that there might be some conclusions made here, but we shouldn't really trust them on a first experience basis, because people could have answered these questions or they could have adapted to polyphasic schedules a long time ago and still answered the survey in 2018, so there would have been a time bias, and the information gathered here isn't objective, it's of course subjective, so there's a subjective bias here, and I just want you all to keep this in mind, that there might be some conclusions drawn here that should maybe, or that maybe don't correlate with what we're preaching, but there's still some validity to this, because we have 72 entries, so it must mean something, but the surety is not too high. So let's start with the demographic of people. This is what we start in the survey. It's just we just try to get a profile of what the polyphasic sleep attempters were like. If we start with the experience, there were 8 people who weren't polyphasic. This question is perhaps a bit badly worded, because some people could have treated this "I'm not polyphasic" option as "I'm not currently polyphasic," which was unfortunate. 16 people had less than 1 month of experience, 18 people had 1 to 2 months of experience, 13 people had 3 to 5 months of experience, 13 people had 6 to 11 months of experience, and 8 people had 12 or more months of experience. The gender for this study, it was interesting to see such a high percentage of males. We had 88% males and 12% females. And this is an equation of the age of the participants. It was included for statistical purposes. In case people would be interested in comparing percentages of certain age ranges from all the data, they could just integrate the equation with the ranges of ages they wanted to see and divide it by the integer of the whole age range. It's clear that a majority of people here in the survey were young, even without using this mathematical operation that I just described. We can go over to the professions part. The professions were assigned based on the Wikipedia definition of them. A majority of participants were students, most likely because of the aforementioned ages. The second largest group was white collars, then blue collars and unemployed people with as many replies each, and lastly pink collars. The unclear ones were reported as self-employed, which can refer to any job type. If you've done the 2019 Polyphasic survey, you can see that we've already categorized these profession types. But in the 2018 Polyphasic survey, we just asked them what's your job, they could reply, and from there I took the answers and categorized them myself. Then we go to this interesting monophasic habits graph. The average person who filled out this survey slept 7.6 hours while monophasic and felt rested at 6.7 on a one-to-tail scale with that sleep duration. In the scale here, the 10 was classified as feeling good and 1 was feeling bad. And it's interesting to see that the less people slept, the better they generally felt from this trend line here. What do you guys think the cause of this is? Okay, no bold people. I think that it's like when you sleep longer, your body starts aching more from being in the same position for so long. I think that's the main reason for this, and we also feel I at least feel more disoriented when I sleep monophasically than when I sleep polyphasically, and this is sort of telling of that. Yeah, there was this one study that concluded that people who slept, was it around 6 hours, had the best life expectancy, whilst people who slept over 9 hours had the worst, or as bad as sleeping below 5 hours or something like that. Very interesting to see. But if we hop on to the next slide here, 4.47 hours of exercising in a week was the average amount per person, and 2.15 of average intensity, where 1 is low and 3 is high. This was also categorized based on, like we asked them how intense was your exercising, and they said it was very intense, or they perhaps didn't even describe their intensity, which we have improved for 2019 Polyphasic survey. But still, the intensity of exercising wasn't dependent on the age of people, but older people exercised a bit more than younger ones. And while we can't really correlate this to polyphasic sleep a lot, we can try to establish a profile of the average polyphasic sleeper. I don't currently know the average hours of exercising a week for globally or for Americans or Western Europeans, but 4.47 for 7 hours sounds pretty low to me. And we move on to the exercise categories. These were classified as or we just pulled out information on what type of fitness activity people did. 2 people did flexibility exercises. Non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT, was done by 7 people. Cardio was done by 37 people, which is clearly a majority here. Strength by 24 people, and unspecified 19. People who do cardiovascular workouts train the most each week also, which was pretty cool to see. We can see this in this graph here to the right. And if we look at this, how the exercising habits changed when they became polyphasic, we can see that 21 people exercised more, 12 people exercised less, and 30 people didn't change the amount of exercising they did. What we can derive from this is that switching to a polyphasic schedule most likely either increases the amount of people that people exercise or doesn't change it at all. The most common stated reason for the increase of the amount of exercise was because polyphasic sleep allowed people to have more time to exercise. And the reason for less exercise was mostly a lack of energy. In the 2019 polyphasic survey, we have changed the question to, most questions to include before, during, and after adaptation mark here. We, for example, don't know if the people who exercised less, if they had adapted to any schedules. I could pull out that information, but I didn't do this for this survey. And now here comes an interesting part. It's food and diets. If people reported several diets at once, they were counted as separate in this survey. So we had 47 people on a normal diet, 6 people on a keto diet, 13 people on an intermittent fasting diet, 1 people on OMAD, 2 people on paleo, 6 people on a vegan diet, 2 people on a vegetarian diet, and 2 people on a generally reduced calorie intake diet. As a result of switching to polyphasic sleep, 17 ate more, 11 ate less, and 31 ate an unchanged amount, so the results varied quite a bit. Here you can see a graph of that. This is the next slide, eating habits. What we can derive from this is that people who switch to polyphasic schedules seem to either not pay much attention to the eating habits they have, as most of them were unchanged, or they could possibly try to improve their health. Then we go forward to the strictness of fasts. 24 people were more strict with their fasts, 2 people were less strict, and 30 people were unchanged with their strictness. I suspect that this is because we tell people that it's beneficial to be strict with their fasts. We hope that people coincide a nightly fast during their dark period, because it's been shown that eating can affect the circadian rhythm, and this would thus make sure that they remain healthier than if they just eat throughout the night. Now for stimulant consumption. For this one, I have pulled out the before, during, and after adaptation. Not during, but before and during adaptation. Yeah. 38 people drank caffeine before they started the adaptation. 17 drank during the adaptation, and I'll hop over to the next one. So, oh, sorry, it's not included here. But 5 people added caffeine to their diets after they had adapted, and 1 removed the caffeine from their diet after they had adapted. With nicotine, 3 people smoked before they started the adaptation. 1 people smoked during the adaptation, and no one had successfully adapted while smoking. With modafinil, 1 people was taking it before the adaptation, 0 were taking it during the adaptation, and no one was taking it after the adaptation. The information shows that most people decreased their stimulant consumption when starting a polyphasic adaptation, as we are recommending. Some people did increase their consumption after finishing the adaptation process, however. And I think that's very, very normal. You pay extra attention to your life and your strictness during the adaptation, and then when everything becomes a bit more flexible, you also start taking caffeine. Then we hop over to the alcohol. And the alcohol consumption varied quite a bit, as you can see from this graph. 4 people drank more than 3 times a week, 11 people drank 1 to 2 times a week, 13 people drank 1 to 3 times a month, 16 people drank less than once a month, and 32 people didn't drink at all. And the number of people who adapted was 3 people for the over 3 times a week of alcohol consumption, and that's adapted per attempted rate of 75%. With the 1 to 2 times a week of drinking, 5 people had adapted, and that's a success rate of 45%. With 1 to 3 times a month, 10 people had adapted, and that's success rate of 77%. With less than once a month, 8 people had adapted, and that's a rate of 50%. And for those who had never drank, 16 people had adapted, and that's success rate of 50%. 8 people out of the 8 that described their change in drinking amounts specified that they started drinking smaller amounts of alcohol each session while polyphasic compared to when they were monophasic. And the sample size for people who had adapted to at least one polyphasic schedule would, while drinking more regularly than 3 times a week, was rather small. So I wouldn't draw any conclusions on that. Even though the success rate was 75%, it's still only a sample of 4 people. So alcohol intake after adapting. Not much change here. A bit over 27 people drank more or didn't drink any different. 5 people decreased their amount, and 1 person increased. So no big changes here. Now we switch over to drug use or drug consumption. 6 people took less drugs when they started polyphasic sleep, and 8 people didn't change it at all. No people increased their drug consumption amounts. We can see here that we've listed cannabis, modafinil, prescription drugs, and hard drugs. No people who took modafinil or hard drugs adapted. With cannabis, there was 50% adaptation rate, and with prescription drugs, or sorry, no, that was with polyphasic users. So this is only describing how many did it during the adaptation and how many did it while polyphasic. But the percentage of adaptation success shows that 67% of people who took less drugs adapted, and 63% of people who didn't change their consumption amounts also adapted. There was a clear lack of users of any kinds of drugs except for cannabis and prescription drugs while monophasic, as you can see here. And over to overall health. This data was hard to quantify, but I did my best. And there could unknowingly have been others who, for example, were overweight, but forgot to mention that in the survey. So for future surveys, having clearer pre-made alternatives is beneficial, and that's what we did for the 2019 Polyphasic survey. So 4 people were overweight, 3 people had an okay physical health, and 65 people had a good physical health. So it's a pretty high percentage of good people versus the others. With medical issues, only negative ones were specified, but 10 people had some medical issues and 3 people had clear medical issues. And mental issues, 3 people had somewhat bad mental issues and 12 people had clearly bad mental issues. So when they became polyphasic, this is pretty interesting to me. This shows that 2 people claimed that they felt worse while on monophasic schedules, and they specified that the issues were related to the adaptation process, or 2 of the 5 people who felt worse. This information is quite telling that either polyphasic sleep subjectively improves people's health or leaves it unchanged, as 17 or 18 people felt better health-wise on a polyphasic schedule, and 34 people felt unchanged, and only 5 people felt worse. So we move on to the sexual health of polyphasic sleepers. 2 people masturbated more than 3 times a week, 9 people between 1 and 3 times a week, 2 people less than once a week, and 9 people never. Of the number of adapted people, or as an adapted percentage rather, we can see that for those who did it more than 3 times a week, 2 people adapted, and they had thus an adaptation percent of 100%. With 3 times a week, 7 people had adapted, so it's a 78%. Less than 1 times a week, 1 people had adapted, that's a percentage of 50. And for the never ones, 6 people had adapted, so that's a percentage of 67%. And yeah, we can also see from these graphs that intercourse doesn't affect people's adaptation rates. People who masturbated less frequently than 3 times a week, but more frequently than never, managed to adapt at a worse percentage than people who did it very frequently or never, as you can see from these staple graphs. So let's talk about orgasms. 5 people felt an increased alertness boost from them. 11 people felt increased tiredness, and 5 people felt no change in that regard. And as its effect on sleep, 5 people felt that they made their sleep deeper. 1 person said that it shortened their total sleep time, and 11 people said that there had been no effect. The results were rather varied here, with a majority of people feeling like orgasms induce tiredness. It might be wise for people to test out how orgasms affect themselves and possibly use that information to time their orgasms so they either stay awake or fall asleep easier. But most people felt that their orgasms had no effect on sleep. A small percentage of people felt like it increased their sleep depth and made it harder to wake up during the next morning. So further testing regarding the effects of orgasms on sleep will be necessary in order to determine this. For now, at least, it seems like the results are very varied. So, yeah. And how did people's sexual activities change when they became polyphasic from monophasic? 3 people increased their sexual activity, 10 people decreased it, and 35 people had an unchanged life regarding this. So switching to a polyphasic schedule most likely doesn't change one's sexual patterns. However, there's still a portion of people that experience a decrease in sexual activity. Well, you have to compare like time gained, um, or staying awake longer might increase their lust, while the adaptation process in itself might make them feel more lethargic and therefore not interested in doing any of these things. So it's a mix here. Mm. But after adapting, I'd say that it shouldn't change much at all. I don't really see how how their total sleep time would affect them here, except during the adaptation when they have a higher number of or more sleep deprivation than otherwise. Okay, let's hop to the next one. This is cool. This is about productivity. Um, Out of the 11 people who claimed that they had gotten a decreased productivity while polyphasic, 8 of them specified that this was during the adaptation only, and the other 3 did not specify anything. 11 people, as I said earlier, had a lowered productivity when polyphasic, and a whopping 39 people had a higher productivity. So, in conclusion, it's very safe to say that polyphasic sleep increases people's productivity after adapting, but it might decrease their productivity during the adaptation. What do you have any anecdotal experiences of this? Okay, no worries. We don't need people saying how their productivity has changed. Now, let's enter the most interesting part of this polyphasic sleep and specifics regarding this. So, 38 people had adapted to a biphasic schedule, and 72 people had attempted a biphasic schedule. With Everyman, 72 people had attempted it, while 23 had adapted. With Dual Core, 29 had attempted, while 12 had adapted. With Tricore schedules, 13 people had attempted, while 2 had adapted. And with NAP onlys, 14 people had attempted, while 2 had adapted. For this table, Trimaction was included in the Everyman section, while Bimaction was included in the Dual Core category. So, Everyman schedules had the largest number of attempters, as you can see here. The staples are clearly largest to the right on the Everyman schedules. And out of the people who answered the survey, it was clearly seen that biphasic and Everyman schedule groups were the most popular. The least popular one was Tricore. That was the Tricore group. What's interesting is that comparison between attempted and adapted schedules, especially in the biphasic and the Everyman schedule groups, this shows that these groups had the same 50 attempted people, but the percentage of successful adaptations is clearly higher for the biphasic group. Specifically, the biphasic group had 38 successful adaptations per 72 attempts, while the Everyman group had 23 successful adaptations per 72 attempts, which results in a higher success to failure rate of 21% units for biphasic schedules. Do you have any comments on this graph? Because I think this is one of the most interesting graphs we got from this survey. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this graph is very good like evidence to persuade people to do gradual adaptations more, because they'll have a higher chance to succeed with biphasic adaptations, and then they can switch over to the next one and keep the success going, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So let's hop over to the next one here. Um, the average difficulty of schedules with restricted answers. The restricted just refers to me removing the schedules where the where the sample size of people answering how difficult they were four or fewer. They skewed the results a bit, but uh, actually not too much. But I still chose to show this one in this presentation here. Um, you can see here that it's a quite telling result. The interesting thing to me is that triphasic was apparently less difficult than with E3. I'd say that triphasic is harder than E3, but again, it was kind of a small sample size. So if we stare a little bit less at this graph, we can take a look at this one instead, which shows the difficulty versus total sleep time. This equation doesn't take into account schedule line differences, but it still gives an estimate of the difficulty of scheduled sleep versus the total sleep time. All biphasic schedules had approximately the same difficulty, and the dual core line was on average more difficult than the everyman line. Yeah, do you have any comments regarding this graph? Yeah, it's cool. I just think it's cool. Okay, so adaptation methods. I already uh, advertised the gradual adaptation method a bit, but this is even better evidence in my opinion. So 34 people were successful with their cold turkey adaptation, which is a percentage of 63 of success versus attempts. With gradual adaptation, 100% adapted. With reverse gradual adaptation, 0% adapted. Same thing with fast gradual adaptation. With staying awake before starting, 44% adapted. Uberman as a precursor to E3, 100% of people adapted, but there was only one person who had done that, so the sample size is quite low. And with naptation, it was a 17% chance of adapting. So yeah, I feel like this is showing if we ignore the low uh, the low attempt groups here, like Uberman is a precursor to E3, fast gradual adaptation, and reverse gradual adaptation. We can sort of see that staying awake before starting, these methods, naptation and that one, had a lower chance than starting out without sleep deprivation. As we've also been advertising on polyphasic.net, so it was good to see some backing for that, some concrete evidence. That's for sure. And I should also note um, that this doesn't take like several attempts into account. This is just a graph of if they have at some point adapted with this method. So if you've attempted 10 schedules with cold turkey and adapted to one, that counts as one successful adaptation. If you've tried to attempt to 100 schedules and adapted once, that's also a successful attempt. We didn't change this for the 2019 polyphasic survey, but in the future, I think we will split this up with like people listing how many times they have attempted a schedule and how many times they attempted an adaptation method and how many times they successfully adapted with that method, just to get clearer results here. And yep, I get what you're saying. The cold turkey staple is clearly the highest. It has the largest sample size. But gradual adaptation still has 7 people. It's something. It's not perfect, but it's something. And if we compare that to like just these staples, the one with a low certainty, staying awake before starting, and gradual adaptation, it's in my opinion safe to assume that while gradual adaptation would decrease in size as the sample size increased, it shouldn't do it at the same degree as staying awake before starting. But okay, this is also one of the coolest graphs we have here. This shows that the number of people, this is about the number of people who shorten their sleeps by specific amounts. So the average number of hours that people were able to reduce their sleeps with when becoming polyphasic was 2.07, or about 2 hours. This information shows that even somewhat large reductions of total sleep time, 4 or 4.5 hours, are possible when becoming polyphasic. If you look at the number of people who successfully shortened their sleeps by 4.5 hours, it's only 1 person, but 5 people shortened their sleep with 4 hours, and no people shortened their sleep with more than 4.5 hours. So yeah, this is also a cool one. Do you have any comments on this? Yep, what you say makes total sense to me. So yeah, I think it's important that we show new people like these graphs regarding polyphasic sleep that have come from this survey. Like if we have an Napoli attemptee who sleeps 12 hours a day, it might be wise to show this and say that, hey, people haven't really been able to adapt that low. Please reconsider. These results were also not really correlated to the total sleep time they had while monophasic. So uh, I had I had one entry of a guy who slept 6 hours during the night and shortened his sleep by 4 hours. So I didn't really want to include a graph that shows like the correlation between monophasic sleep time and sleep reduced because of that one result there. So let's move on to the nap depth compared to time of the day. Mm. People, 20 people reported that their morning had deep sleep. 8 people that their noon sleeps were deep, and 3 people that their afternoon sleeps were deep. Mm, and I mean, these results support the evidence that the majority of naps should be scheduled to be morning heavy or possibly at noon in order to get a sufficient amount of REM. Now this question was perhaps worded somewhat poorly, because deep in this case could be misinterpreted as deep sleep or SWS, but still the results sort of speak for themselves to show that people most likely interpreted the question to refer to REM naps. Um, a more suitable question would have been to ask, like, do you have you gotten SWS naps in the morning, REM naps in the morning, light sleep naps in the morning, and so on, which is what we did for the 2019 Polyphasic survey. Still, when you're helping out with new people, it's cool to also show this as evidence why they should schedule their naps to be morning heavy, so that they can get the most amount of REM in them. And now we get into this pretty crazy part, in my opinion, because it's very hard to quantify flexing. Now, what does flexing mean? It means shifting sleep times. Mm. Adapted compared to unadapted flexors, well, 44% of flexors adapted and 56% didn't adapt. Out of 36 people who had flexed during the adaptation, 16 had adapted to at least one schedule. This slide is unfortunately very heavy on information, so feel free to ask about it now, or we can just continue. If there's anything important you want to look at, just holler at me, and otherwise we'll just run past through this. Okay, well I'll just say that it was around as popular to flex cores as it was to flex naps. Some of this information could be wrong, because there were people whose answers were interpreted for them giving a number as to how much they flex without specifying which schedule this was the case for. And for those people, all their schedules were assumed to have been flexed, and the schedules got a certain minutes flexed. Yes, well, if you look at the data, it doesn't really support that, which is a bit odd, but maybe the next slide will give some more insight to that. This is listed as people, or number of persons who specified which schedules they flexed. And we can see here that, for example, person number 9, they it was assumed that they flexed 60 minutes for siesta, everyman 1, everyman 2, everyman 3, and dual core 1, which is a pretty wide range, and probably wasn't the case. This has also been improved for 2019 Polyphasic survey. But yeah, person 6 flexed 30 minutes for everyman 2, 30 minutes for everyman 3, 30 minutes for bimection, and 30 minutes for spamile. It's also, if I were to guess, they probably referred to flexing spamile by 30 minutes, but I don't know. The sample size is quite questionable, so no major conclusions should be drawn regarding the flexing duration. This table also shows where the assumptions regarding similar flexing times for people were made, as I said earlier. So yeah, don't use this to encourage flexing for people. It was a badly worded question that has been improved in the next survey. So, minutes flexed on average as a function of total sleep time for each schedule. Even with the odd results, we could see that the average flexibility in minutes, like the trend line for this, decreased as the total sleep hours for the schedule decreased, which it should be like, in my opinion. But let's hop over something more clear. The specific nap lengths of people. 39 people provided their usual nap lengths. Some people had different lengths for different naps. 7 people clarified that they had premature wakes in their naps, and 5 people provided at what point this happened. So if you look at this, we can clearly see that the that 20-minute naps were the most popular. We had some a bit lower and a bit higher, some pretty low and pretty high, but there's a large majority with 20-minute naps. This is most likely because we're encouraging people to take naps that are 20 minutes long. So, schedule choice restrictors, or what caused people to not sleep as much as they wanted, or otherwise not sleep the schedules that they would preferably have. 90 people listed time restrictors as the reason. 3 people exercising, and 3 people their significant other. Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that, at least from my experience, people who want to do certain schedules aren't able to because they have work which limits their choice or something like that. It's pretty clear, straightforward. Other things listed here, why they chose their specific schedules were total sleep time reduction, increased sleep quality, dreaming benefits, naturally segmented, religious reasons, insomnia cure, more energy, improved health, curiosity, increased productivity, discipline, napping experience, an easy adaptation process, or that they were on a gradual adaptation process. Most people clearly stated a total sleep time reduction as their main choice for becoming polyphasic. And other people affecting their schedule choices. Yeah, it was pretty somewhat even, or I don't know, even 2/3 said that there were no other people affecting their schedule choices, but 37% said that there were other people affecting their schedule choice. Now, more cool information amongst this crazy stuff. Adaptation success. This is basically how long it took for people to adapt. The average adaptation duration was 5.2 weeks. You can see here we had one crazy example with an 18-week adaptation process. Some odd ones with 1.5 week, 1 week, 2 weeks. Yeah, most people still took like a median number of the median number was 4 weeks for adapting, and followed closely by 6 weeks. So it's safe to assume that an adaptation process takes around 1 to 2 months, or 1 to 1.5 months, with some odd sparkles of longer adaptation times. Then we go to quitting. This is the number of people that quit after a certain amount of time. This is also not specified for schedules. This is just an overall question, and that should be improved in further studies. But the information gathered yielded that most people quit after 7.7 weeks on a schedule on average. Outside of the graph, 2 people quit after half a year on schedule, and 1 quit after 9 months, and another one after 2 years. And people who quit after only a day or 2 were not counted. Still, a majority of people here, the median answer show that most people quit within the first or second weeks. Yeah, do you say something? Sorry, could you repeat that? Yeah, of course. I think the reason they quit was probably falling sick. Or we can get to that in the next one here, actually, uh, which lists the reason for quitting. Um, 7 people stated social issues. You can read these numbers for yourself. Most people quit because of oversleeping, which was of course during the adaptation. There are some here that are more prominent for during adaptations and some that are more prominent for after adaptations. Um, like bad schedule and oversleeping are uh, understandable reasons for quitting during the adaptations, while sickness or social issues are understandable for quitting after adaptation. But yeah, the main reasons for quitting were social issues, oversleeping, and the schedule becoming unfit for the specific person that uh, they yeah for the specific person. So side effects when returning to monophasic sleep. 30 people listed no side effects. Um, 6 people were reminded of how bad monophasic sleep was. But um, there are some temporary issues, uh, depression, naturally waking up at all times, sleep interruptions, tiredness at all times, and decreased motivation. And more permanent side effects when becoming monophasic were uh, getting REM in their naps. 1 people listed that. 1 people listed decreased motivation, and 1 person listed a cognitive impairment. So most temporary issues that occurred when returning to monophasic sleep were in direct correlation to old sleep habits, such as waking up naturally at the old times or feeling dips in energy during the old nap times. Now, the permanent side effects can't, of course, be confirmed to be actually permanent, but if they have been present for a long time with no sign of stopping, they were classified as permanent. The permanent motivation decrease had, for example, only remained on a monophasic schedule for a month. And as a conclusion regarding the permanent side effects, it can be said that it seems like polyphasic sleep is relatively safe, with 2 long-term side effects specified out of 76 entries. But more testing is necessary in this regard. It's surprising that so few people mentioned any side effects during the adaptation, but if those symptoms are compared to the side effects after adaptation, it can be seen that all negative symptoms have disappeared once the people adapted. The only negative side effects that were reported after adaptation were worse alcohol tolerance and a lower threshold for becoming irritated after skipping sleep, as you can see here. But okay, let's hop over to the third and last section of this survey. I think we'll have time to go through everything today. If we keep at the current pace, it should take less than 90 minutes. Okay, staying awake. Um, People did several types of activities to stay awake. Mm, all the ones listed here were activities that people claimed were good at keeping them awake. So no bad activities were listed due to lack of answers on that part of the question. Is there anything here you want to comment on? Anything that seems odd or understandable? Could you repeat that? Yeah, I can't really hear you speaking. Is the issue on my part or is it on your part? Am I coming clear? Or am I coming through clear? Okay, okay. Well. If you just repeat it quickly, you came through much clearer now. So we'll see if I can catch it. this is this is during the adaptation, or I don't think it was specified, but it seems pretty odd that people had to shock themselves to get out of bed after they have adapted. Yeah, this was like how they tried to stay awake. And many of these things are physical, like exercising had 23 number of people who tried it and 22 walked around. Well, I mean, maybe. Two people did it in order to stay awake. Um, I could perhaps compare if they had adapted to any schedules, but I mean, it's sort of exercising. So during the masturbation process, I think it's reasonable that they stay awake better. Just the issue that when they're done, that's when the issue arises. Yeah, but as I said earlier, you should try to understand your own body on this regard and see how it affects you. Yeah, pretty crazy. So, dark period filtering tools. Mm, 80 people used glasses, 25 people used filtering applications, 1 people used a flashlight with red light, and 2 people used red lamps. Dark period lengths. Um, Most people had a length of 2 hours before their core. Mm, some people also had no dark period and 1 hour of length, but the sample size was quite small here. But still, most people used a 2 hour dark period. Um, the following effects of having a dark period were mentioned. There was tiredness of 2 people, higher sleep quality 4 people, shorter sleep onset 2 people, shorter SWS onset 1 person, and no effect 2 people. Now, EEG evidence of the effects of dark periods were extremely sparse in the survey results, unfortunately. So they were claiming things that they shouldn't probably have been able to claim, like shorter SWS onset. But that's fine. We're investigating this on a more scientific scale at the moment, regardless. Then we go to menstruation. Um, According to this information, women's menstruation is mostly unaltered during the adaptation. However, some can experience an irregular menstruation during the adaptation. Because of this, it's most likely wise to abstain from birth control that relies on a regular menstruation cycle during the adaptation. So, as you can see here, a pretty small percent that where the cycle was altered, but it was still altered by some people. So they should be extra cautious. Then we go to meditation. Because of its calming effect, meditation could be considered a benefit during the adaptations. As you can see here, 9 people reported that they had a calming effect. 1 person reported that it increased their alertness, and 3 people said it had no effect. Um, the 23 people, or 33%, meditated of the people who filled out the survey, and 67% didn't. Now, it's best to consider practicing meditation while standing or by using multiple alarms during the adaptation to ensure that you don't accidentally fall asleep while you meditate. And no meditator had used an EEG to evaluate their sleep. So yeah, shifting time zones. 4 people noted that it had a bad effect on them. 6 people said it had no effect. 1 person claimed that it delayed their adaptation, and 1 person claimed that it actually destroyed their adaptation. So, um, it will likely have a bad or neutral effect on the schedule, shifting time zones, that is. Alternative references. Yes, this is also pretty interesting in my opinion. Um, a majority of people had gained information from Polyphasic Society. That site has also the most amount of dislikes. Let's see if I can show it. Yeah. Uh, so this is a graph comparing how well these alternative resources performed in their opinion. Uh, 4 people didn't like Polyphasic Society, 2 people didn't like Ubersleep, 1 person didn't like Why We Nap. Mm. It should be, or Paradoxic's blog was included in the blogs section here, so 1 person enjoyed blogs. Note that this number of reviews of the content doesn't refer to the number of people who had used said content. They were quite different. Like, we didn't get everyone who listed a reference to uh, like quantify how well they thought it went. Did you have anything to say? I'm sorry, what? Yes, that's correct. 0 people had listed them as bad. Uh, However, only 2 people had used blogs and 3 people had used Pavlina, and there are only 2 results here for validating how well they performed. So yeah, I mean, this is much clearer asked in the 2019 Polyphasic survey. So I don't think we should rely on this too much for information. Anyways, applications used. 42 people had used some applications to help them adapt, while 34 hadn't. Light filtering and no more oversleeps were popular applications. Also alarm me. I have categorized these in colors so we can see the yellow ones was for light filtering, blue was for uh, alarms, green were for activity tracking. Then there's my noise, some scheduling applications, and finally nap chart. And again, I don't think that people who like these results aren't really telling. There were probably several people who had used Snapchart but just didn't list it as an application. So this was also improved for the 2019 Polyphasic survey. Then we go to sleep trackers. 12 people had used EEGs for sleep tracking, 9 people had used applications, 10 people used wrist-worn sleep trackers, and 2 people used smartwatches. Um, Smartwatches could technically be counted as wrist-worn sleep trackers, but I just didn't do that. So this shows that 35 people were tracking their sleep, which is 46% of the total number of people. Uh, the amount of people who were tracking their sleep with applications was quite high, which is strange because applications are known to be very inaccurate. Uh, it's most likely the free information that has caused them to use trackers, since the sleep tracker applications listed are either free or cost a very small amount of money. 52% of people with sleep trackers had adapted to at least one polyphasic sleep schedule in the past. If we take a look at this graph here, we can see that 8 people used CEOs, 4 people used Olimex, OpenEEGs, and yeah, quite a few people used Sleep as Android and Sleep Cycle, which are mobile applications. Mm, yes, It was mentioned, but I didn't pull out that. Could you repeat that? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I just didn't pull the information for this survey, but I can pull it if you're interested. So yeah, yeah, alarm types. Most people used phone applications. Um, some people used mechanical alarms, but the other ones are quite poor. Um, so yeah, phones were the main alarm source followed by wearable alarms. I think this is quite understandable as well. Everybody has a phone and they don't feel the need to invest in harder alarms like a mechanical alarm. And if we look at the specific alarms, there's quite a large list here of different. We use this information for the 2019 Polyphasic survey. We put these results in plus some more to see if people are more accurate with describing which alarms they used. So yeah, that's all for this. Now, do we have any questions? Okay, no questions. That's completely fine. The important parts here to pull out are, of course, from the polyphasic sleep uh, category here. I hope that these will be used more frequently when helping new people. Um, and yeah, I don't really have much to say besides this. Mm, thank you all for coming. I hope that this has been that you've enjoyed this conversation, and we'll be seeing you in the future. I probably won't be hosting the next research discussion, but we can probably expect someone to do it next week. For the 2019 Polyphasic survey, um, we're going to be closing the entries probably in December or in the end of December, and we'll be analyzing them all through January and hopefully post the results in February. That was about how long it took last time, like 1 month to analyze the data. Absolutely. Yep. If anyone hasn't completed the polyphasic survey, the 2019 polyphasic survey, uh, we can post a link to it in sleep research discussion. We are at the moment at over 80 entries, which is very cool to see. It's more than what we had last time. So hopefully we can get to at least 100 before the year is over. Then I don't know about the 2020 polyphasic survey. It could be that that's the last one that we'll make, since we'll have such specific questions at that point. It could also be a perpetual survey that we just analyze once a year the data from there, perhaps remove some old entries when people put new ones in and release a new survey or a survey analysis every year with that. We'll do something like that. We'll see. But hopefully the question should be clear by then. Yeah, absolutely, no problem. And I mean, uh, it's also possible to split this survey into multiple parts. For example, the polyphasic part could be made into a smaller survey that could probably bring in quite a few more people who bring data, but it's also interesting to see how certain lifestyles affect their sleep. Though, since everything of this caliber is subjective, uh, maybe we should remove it from the 2020 survey and just do EEG experiments with it in the future. We'll see. We'll see what we'll do. But okay, thank you all for coming, and yeah, sure, sure. But okay, thank you all. I'll be closing the discussion now, and we'll upload it to YouTube, um, probably on Monday. Yeah, on Monday. So if you missed something, or yep, yep, if you missed something or came or didn't listen to this at all, maybe until the end, feel free to join us there on YouTube, and you can watch this whole thing again. Maybe if something isn't clear to you, you can try to see if you found it, if it was talked about at all, or if you still have questions. But okay, take care, guys. Bye bye. Hey, thanks for making it this far. I want to take this time to shout out our coffee page. Donations go a long way with improving the knowledge of the community and helps us continue the upkeep of polyphasic.net. We plan on funding experiments and sleep trackers for members of the community in the future, and that in turn helps us make sure the scientific endeavors of polyphasic sleep are kept up. And if you like our content, we would really appreciate it if you click the subscribe button and the bell icon so you don't miss out on any videos in the future. Also, if you'd like to chat with us, you can join our Discord. This is where most polyphasic sleep related discussions take place. The links will be in the description. Thanks again, and I'll see you later.